John Carter was no ordinary man in the world of aviation. As CEO of Skyway Airlines, he had carved out his space in a sector that for decades seemed reserved for only a few. The son of an airplane mechanic and a teacher, he grew up watching planes slice through the Atlanta sky, fueling a dream that for many seemed unattainable. His rise was not without challenges. He always had to prove he deserved to be there, facing suspicious looks and invisible obstacles that few of his colleagues ever had to confront. But that afternoon, as he walked through the terminal of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, he was not there as an executive. Without his impeccable suit and the burdens of high management, John embarked on a personal experiment to travel as any ordinary passenger, experiencing firsthand the service his company offered. As he approached gate C-23, he noticed something was wrong. The flow of passengers continued normally, but as soon as he reached the boarding line, he felt the lingering stares of the gate supervisor, Mike Reynolds, and his colleague, Samantha Walsh. They exchanged a quick glance, as if they had reached a silent understanding. When it was his turn, Mike held the ticket for too long, scrutinizing it as if he expected to find something amiss. "I need to see additional identification," he said bluntly. John frowned. This was not a usual request. No one before him had been subjected to it. He extended his driver's license without argument, but something in Mike's tone bothered him. It wasn't just a procedure, it was a challenge. A test that only he seemed to be facing. John had already passed through airport security. His name was in the system. His ticket was legitimate. Even so, Mike examined the driver's license with a critical eye, as if he were searching for a reason to stop him. All around, other passengers continued boarding without question. Some cast discreet glances, noticing the scene, but no one intervened. John took a deep breath, maintaining his composure. He had faced similar situations before, not during a flight boarding, but throughout his career. Moments when his presence was questioned, his competence underestimated. But at that moment, he was not the CEO of Skyway Airlines. He was just a black man at an airport, trying to board a flight like anyone else. The wait dragged on for long seconds until Mike returned the document, still with a stern expression. "You have been selected for additional screening," he said, calling over a security officer. The tone was cold, bureaucratic, as if he were simply following orders. But John knew what was happening. He knew why it was happening. Anger tried to rise to the surface, but he restrained it. Questioning at that moment would only reinforce the narrative they intended to impose on him. Nearby, Samantha avoided looking at him, but maintained a vigilant gaze, as if expecting a reaction. The security officer arrived quickly, positioning himself between John and boarding. The murmurs among the passengers grew. What should have been a simple boarding process was turning into a public spectacle. John kept his posture firm, but he felt the discomfort intensify. The security officer, a burly man with a neutral expression, asked to see his boarding pass and identification again. It was a tiresome and predictable game, one he knew very well. He handed over the documents without dispute, while the other passengers began to notice that this was not a routine approach. Some averted their eyes, pretending not to notice. Others watched with interest, perhaps already imagining where this would end. John glanced at his watch. The flight would take off in less than 20 minutes. If he questioned too much, if he lost his patience, he knew the situation could escalate quickly. Then he noticed a man a few meters away, holding his cell phone at chest level. He was filming discreetly, his expression serious, as if he already knew what would follow. John did not recognize him, but his presence changed something in the atmosphere. The heavy silence was replaced by murmurs. The security officer realized he was being recorded and hesitated. Mike Reynolds, on the other hand, remained impassive. "Please come with us for further questions, sir," the officer said in a rehearsed tone, as if it had all been decided from the start. John took a deep breath. There was no choice. Either he complied, or he would end up handcuffed in the middle of the terminal. John felt the weight of all eyes on him as he walked alongside the security officer. Some passengers whispered among themselves, others simply watched in silence. The atmosphere at the boarding gate had changed. This was no longer a simple procedure. It had become a public spectacle of humiliation. With each step, he tried to contain his indignation. Decades of corporate experience had taught him to navigate such situations, but that didn't make it any easier. He stole a glance at the man filming, who now seemed more determined. Something in that recording made him feel less alone. He knew that without concrete evidence, his word against theirs would mean nothing. When they reached a separate area of the terminal, John was instructed to empty his pockets and hand over his backpack for inspection. The officer rummaged through everything with an exasperating slowness, as if deliberately searching for something to justify the approach. But there was nothing, only a laptop, chargers, some documents, things that any other passenger would carry. John folded his arms, waiting. He knew that any abrupt movement could be interpreted as resistance. And then came the question he had been expecting. "Can you tell me the purpose of your trip?" the officer asked with an appraising look. John swallowed hard. The irony of the situation was almost comical. The airline's CEO being questioned about why he was boarding a flight from his own company. John inhaled deeply before answering. "I'm going to Chicago on business." It was the truth, but it wasn't the answer that mattered. The officer stared at him for a moment, as if trying to detect a lie. He found nothing. Even so, he did not seem satisfied. He exchanged a quick look with Mike Reynolds, who stood nearby with arms crossed, as if awaiting a conclusion that would justify his approach. John realized that this was not about security. It wasn't about protocol. It was about control. It was about reminding him that there in that terminal, he was not the powerful man signing contracts and leading meetings. There, he was just a passenger who had to prove he deserved to be there. Outside the inspection room, the atmosphere was changing. The video recorded by Ethan Blake was beginning to circulate, and some passengers were already accessing their social networks, sharing the footage. The indignation grew. A group of people discussed among themselves, questioning why that particular man had been stopped while so many others passed through without issues. On Twitter, the video was already gaining traction, with early posts tagged with "You wish to justice for John Carter." Inside the room, however, John was still unaware of any of this. To him, this was just another embarrassing moment he would have to endure alone, like so many others. At least, that's what he thought. The weight dragged on, and the tension in the air grew ever thicker. John observed the officers exchanging glances, clearly unsure of how to proceed. They had found nothing wrong, yet they were unwilling to simply let him go. Mike Reynolds, for his part, seemed intent on prolonging the moment as long as possible. Then, one of the officers received a call on his radio. He listened for a few seconds, frowned, and then looked at John in a different way. Something had changed. The officer ended the call, cleared his throat, and returned the documents. "You are cleared to go," he said without ceremony. John gathered his belongings without a word, but he noticed that as he left the room, the atmosphere around him was different. The video had already spread, and now many passengers looked at him with a mixture of empathy and indignation. Some people whispered among themselves, others simply stared at him, as if they were witnessing the story come to life right before their eyes. It was then that he saw Ethan Blake, the man who had filmed everything, standing a little further ahead. Their eyes met for an instant, and John realized that this time he wouldn't walk away as if nothing had happened. The video was not just a record of what had occurred. It was irrefutable evidence. Ethan Blake had not only captured the approach, but also documented the disparity in treatment between John and the other passengers. In the video, it was evident how white travelers passed without any questioning, while John was stopped and interrogated. The impact was immediate. Within hours, the video had amassed thousands of views, and the comments expressed outrage. Users denounced Skyway Airlines, demanding answers. Others alerted news outlets, ensuring that the case would not go unnoticed. When John finally boarded the plane and took his seat in economy class, his phone began to vibrate non-stop. Messages from friends, colleagues, and journalists poured in. The world already knew what had happened. As the plane taxied on the runway, John looked out the window, feeling a weight in his chest. He did not want this to become an empty controversy, a fleeting headline that would fade in a few days. He knew that the problem went far beyond that incident. It was not just about him. It was about all the people who faced similar situations without cameras to prove what they had experienced. The issue now was not just about clearing his name, it was about exposing the root of the problem. His executive instincts told him to remain calm and wait for the coming hours before acting, but his conscience screamed that this was the moment to take a stand. The moment John landed in Chicago, the crisis had already exploded. Lisa Monroe, Skyway Airlines head of communications, was trying to contain the damage, but the truth was that no one in the company was prepared to handle such a storm. Shareholders were calling frantically, worried about the repercussions. Journalists swarmed the company's New York offices, demanding answers. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Justice for John Carter and Boycott Skyway, and major media outlets were already preparing detailed reports on the case. The public wanted more than vague apologies or lukewarm statements. They wanted justice. To make matters worse, the company faced a delicate dilemma: how to react when their own CEO was the victim. For any other passenger, an apology and compensation might have resolved the issue, but John Carter was not just anyone. He was the face of Skyway Airlines, and now he was living proof that something was deeply wrong in the aviation industry. John barely had time to rest. As soon as he got off the plane, he was whisked away in a company car to a discreet hotel, away from the press. He did not want to return to Skyway's office immediately. He needed to understand what was happening before facing the company's directors. While reviewing hundreds of messages on his phone, one in particular caught his attention. Lisa Monroe had sent something urgent, an attachment followed by a single message. "See this. Now." John opened the file and felt a chill run down his spine. They were copies of leaked internal emails, conversations between North Star Airlines executives and Dallas airport employees. They had orchestrated everything. The order hadn't come directly, but the message was clear. Find a reason to stop John Carter at boarding, expose him to humiliation, and let the press do the rest. It wasn't a simple case of structural racism. It was a targeted attack. John read and reread the leaked emails, feeling his anger grow with every line. It wasn't just an attempt to tarnish his image. It was a carefully planned corporate coup designed to destabilize Skyway Airlines. North Star had not only exploited a deeply rooted prejudice in society, but had also banked on public outrage to devalue his company and gain market advantage. The thought of being used as a pawn in this dirty game disgusted him, but he knew that in the world of business, the right response could turn an attack into a strategic victory. Instead of reacting impulsively, he took a deep breath and began to plan. If they wanted war, he would give them one they could not win. The first call was to Lisa Monroe. "We've been compromised," he said without hesitation. It wasn't enough to defend himself. He needed to turn the tables. Skyway Airlines would hold a press conference immediately, exposing the evidence that North Star had manipulated the situation. At the same time, documents would be sent to influential reporters, ensuring that the story spread quickly. But he wanted more than just a public response. He called his legal team, demanding a formal investigation into North Star's conduct and its direct involvement in the incident. Within an hour, the issue dominated the news. What had started as a scandal of racism in aviation was turning into something even bigger, a corporate conspiracy to destroy a competitor. The fallout was devastating for North Star Airlines. Within hours, the company had gone from being a bystander in the scandal to the defendant in the court of public opinion. The leaked emails spread like wildfire, and the indignation that had once fallen on Skyway Airlines now turned against the true villain of the story. Investors began to abandon North Star, causing its stock to plunge 14% in the market. In response, the company's board entered crisis mode, desperately trying to minimize the damage. But there was no longer any room for damage control. The hashtag North Star Conspiracy led global trending topics, and journalists dug into every detail of the company's business practices. What began as a covert attack against John Carter and Skyway Airlines turned into a public implosion that no one at North Star was prepared to face. The pressure eventually led to the inevitable outcome. Martin Caldwell, North Star Airlines CEO, was forced to resign. But for John Carter, the fight was far from over. He knew that this was not just a battle between two companies, but a reflection of a much larger issue. Using his position and influence, he pushed for real change in aviation. Under his leadership, Skyway Airlines implemented a pioneering anti-racial discrimination training program for all employees. In addition, he pressured the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, to reinforce policies ensuring equal treatment for all passengers. Other companies followed suit, and the industry's culture began to change. A year later, when John boarded a Skyway flight, he noticed something different. No suspicious glances, no questioning, no invisible barriers. For the first time, he was just an ordinary passenger, and that was exactly how it should be.